So an organisation that already exists...
it's in its nascency.
Well, I'm just saying that this is the National Trust.
Yes.
And that also, of course, has a lot of volunteers.
It does.
The number of volunteers is decreasing, according to a report that came out this week. Also, the number of members have decreased as prices are going up. So there's been a lot of talk over the last few years about the wokeness of the National Trust. Is this the chickens sort of coming home to roost?
I think the National Trust is an interesting example of O'Sullivan's first law, my boss Johnny O'Sullivan's first law, that any institution that is not inherently conservative will over time become left-wing. The National Trust was founded, actually, much as the London International Chopin competition, by a group of people who had an ideal, one of whom, Octavia Hill, was herself a socialist. But this was never a party political thing. It was always designed to be initially a group for the preservation of our open spaces, and then, as the 20th century moved on and taxation crippled landed estates, for country houses. And that became the focus from the 1930s onwards. And actually, I think there's some clever lawyer out there might just have a look at the 1937 Act of Parliament that governs the National Trust, because in there is a codicil which requires the National Trust, under force of law, to keep their houses in as near as possible to the original state of use as when they were given to the Trust. Now, we can see very clearly that that is not what the National Trust is doing now, so there may well be a breach of their Parliamentary Act. And in terms of their recent performance, the drop in the number of subscribers after a way above inflation increase in subscriptions over recent years, the small rise in attendance, but as you say, the drop in the number of people volunteering, this seems to me to be very clearly linked to what is not a party political programme of any kind of activism, but what we would say is wokeism. The thing that really irritates me as an historian about the National Trust is that so little of what they're doing is based on good history. It's based entirely on a partial reading of aspects of our history which they wish to highlight in order to discredit the national story. They're not doing what good historians do, which is to say, here are the full facts of the situation, because they're very bad at getting facts right. I mean, the number of times I've had to write and correct them on basic things of dates and people is without count at this point.
Everyone's got to have a hobby.
Well, I know. The point is that they're not actually engaging in good history. They're engaging in straightforward partial activism. And again, I don't think that this body, which is funded by our money, whether as subscribers or through grants, should be engaging in this kind of thing. It is very simply established by Act of Parliament to keep open spaces available for the populace and to keep country houses in good order when their builders or occupants were no longer able to do it. Those are its two primary functions. That's what it should be doing. If they manage to teach some good history through that, marvellous. But at the moment, they're not.
Yeah, and there is a pushback, of course. We have seen organisations set up to try and hold the Trust to account, but it doesn't seem to be working in terms of they have elections and the leadership. It's not getting through to them.
Well, Restore Trust, which is now run by Cornelia van der Poel, was previously run by Zodito Gebrselassie, is the body. And it has a great deal of support from people across the political spectrum. So you have Charles Moore, Conservative peer, and Lord Sumption, a non-aligned former Supreme Court Justice. They're trying to get onto the Council of the National Trust, onto its committee. But the problem is that the National Trust gerrymanders its elections because it has the ability to use proxy votes and casting votes. It seems, therefore, that the National Trust isn't particularly interested in the views of extremely eminent, educated, well-informed public servants. It's interested only in the views of its small cadre of activists. I was interested in reading up on this, that the director of the Trust 2 years ago admitted that if you were to do a poll of its staff as opposed to volunteers, she said 70% of them could be described as professional activists. That does not seem to me like the sort of complexion that it is desired by its members nor volunteers, and this is probably why they're all falling away. Now, where they're going, I would like to know whether they're going to English National Heritage, for instance, or whether they're simply staying at home. I think this is a question of actual national importance. It may not be one of the great political questions of the age, but that a cherished national institution, over 130 years old, is being subverted by the very people who are entrusted by us with its maintenance is, I think, a nationally important cultural question.
And I think more than that, it serves as an example, because we've seen institution after institution, as you say, captured by activists. So if this is how any change is achieved, then this could serve on a small-scale example of what needs to happen in other institutions. There has to be this pushback and some people being held to account. And when you can see numbers, as we've seen, go down, they are failing to do their job.
Yes, it was precisely as we described in the most recent segment 2 weeks ago about the Arts Council. The problem with national institutions is that for 30 or 40 years now, they have been allowed to be taken over by professional activists, not professionals within those institutional areas. So the National Trust is not run, as it was in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, by professional conservationists, historians, architects, and art history experts. It's run by people who want to tell the rest of us that our entire national story is based on lies, deceit, and the rapine ruination of other countries, none of which is true. It may be an aspect of the national story, but it is not the whole of it, and those people should not be in the position of power that they hold.
Well, right now, it's still captured. We'll see what happens with it. Thank you very much for joining us, David Oldroyd-Bolt. Very passionate there. I love it. Long season. Yeah. Next on Free Speech Nation, it's that time of week again. We'll be having a look at what went viral this week after the break. See you in a few minutes. Thanks, mate. That was good.